Hey, welcome to the Modscast. This time I want to talk about The Red Pill, the film I saw this weekend by Cassie J. For those of you who aren't familiar, I highly recommend it. It's a great film. It's on Amazon Prime. Cassie J was trying to be an actress in Hollywood for a while. She has her story. She talks about it in the film. I don't need to get into it. But she decided to become a filmmaker after she experienced some frustrating things in terms of sexual discrimination and the expectation of what she was supposed to look like and things, traditional problems with women's rights and ability to work in that industry and stuff. She was an ardent feminist, and she did a film. I think she did a couple films on LGBTQ community and women's rights, I think. At any rate, she was a pretty ardent feminist, and then she became aware of the men's rights activists, MRAs as they're called. And she was seeing, hateful comments online and hearing about these horrible people. And so she decided she was going to do a film on that. And so she went for several years and interviewed people and the men's rights movement. And she found some surprising things. And it's well worth watching. I don't need to get into it too much because it's illuminating. And I think what the thing she realized, which was interesting, is that the issue is a lot more complex, and that maybe the trolls on the internet weren't emblematic of the movement. And it's a great example of what I try to talk about all the time, is going at something with an open mind and realizing that it's not what you thought, right? If you're really open to discourse, to being disabused of false notions that you might have, the recognition that we often have a plank in our own eye that prevents us from seeing things as we're trying to remove the speck from another person's, to make reference to scripture there. This is a great example of that, of someone who went at something with an open mind and changed her position. Now she's being vilified on the left. Her film's being protested as being anti-feminist and all of these things, which it isn't. What it reveals is that it's a much more complicated issue, and that it's possible to be pro something without being anti something else. Only a child's mentality sees anybody who is pro their own selves as being anti them, right? When you make it all about yourself. So, well, if you're pro this, you must be anti that. No, not necessarily by any stretch. It's not a zero-sum game, right? What we need are people who are pro all kinds of different things, and then we have to find a way to work together. But the notion that anybody who's pro something must be anti something else, obviously there's certain situations where, there's, say the pro-life people. Okay, well, for them, that's a clear-cut thing of life begins at conception, and so they are anti-abortion. But if you talk to them and they said, the life of the mother is in danger, or, rape, incest, those kind of things, there's exceptions. There's things where they would say, well, if they're reasonable and open to it, right? In other words, if they're not just anti, okay, then they have to see the complexity in that and say, okay, well, clearly the situation where you have to choose between the life of the mother and the life of the child. And that's a difficult decision. And that would obviously be something where this position of pro-life would have to be reconsidered, okay? And that's not the subject of this particular video, although Cassie J gets into some of that, right? And the question of if a man wants to have a child, he doesn't have a choice, right? So she handles that quite interestingly, I think. And not that it provides answers to everything, but it suggests that there may be more questions than you think. Now, for people who want a simplified view of the world, people who want the blue pill, as the saying goes, and for those of you who aren't familiar, the blue pill, red pill thing is from the Matrix, right? And the blue pill is you can take this pill and go back to sleep and live in a world that's just the way you think it is and not be troubled by all of this complexity. Or you can take the red pill and realize that it's much more challenging, right? And that's the hero's call in in the Matrix, right? In terms of the hero cycle and Joseph Campbell and all that, which one are you going to take? Are you willing to go into the deep waters, or down the rabbit hole is the reference that Cassie J uses in the film. And what struck me about it was, and it's similar to, I guess, they did the Wonder Woman screening in New York, and there was going to be only women, and this guy decided to buy a ticket, and then he just got trolled, right? Everyone's like screaming at him, "We're going to do this to you, and women should do this when you get there," and all that. And I guess he went to the movie, and it was no big deal. And the shocking revelation, and I think it was Stefan Molyneux who pointed this out, I want to be sure to give credit. The shocking revelation was that, or maybe it was Shapiro or Clavin, I don't remember, but was that the internet is not reality, right? And I said this in a blog a while back to a friend of mine, but the trolls, look, we've all been at a party where there's somebody who's obnoxious, right? And eventually people throw them out, right? In college or something, get rid of that guy, he's obnoxious, right? And then he's gone and everybody's glad. No, some people might have agreed more or less with the things he was saying or doing, right? But everybody's glad he's gone because none of them are trolls, right? The trolls are the exception. The problem with the internet is it makes us think, and as human beings, we're horrible with numbers, right? So we imagine that the people who are trolling, say the guys who are being trolls on the men's rights activist things, right? Saying just horrific, ridiculous, stupid, anti-woman stuff, right? We imagine that that's representative, but that there's a whole ton of people out there, but there's still just marginal, tiny number of assholes, percentage-wise, in the world. And we have this horrible tendency to imagine that that's what they're all doing, right? And a couple things. We have an impulse to do that, one, because we can feel good. There's an enemy that we can go against, right? So if we imagine there's this huge thing out there that's going against us, and it goes to the anti-pro, right? So if someone's pro men's rights, then they must be anti-women's rights. No, that's making yourself the center of the thing, right? I mean, if they're just being pro men's rights, whether it's in divorce court, child custody, whatever, right? They can be pro that and not be anti-woman. They're just saying, hey, it's not about you, right? It's weird. There's this tendency to point the finger and go, well, you're being selfish. Well, okay, but if you think it's all about you, aren't you being selfish as well? I mean, that's always a problem. And to me, it's the root of most problems, is selfishness, but topic for a different video. The cat is chiming in. He evidently has an opinion. But, yeah, I know. Those of you who know me know that my wife brought the cat to the wedding, to the marriage, okay? And so he's here. I know, I'm not the biggest cat fan in the world, but I don't need to get a bunch of trolls about that anyway. So, the key thing, again, is our tendency to imagine that there's this huge conspiracy and that tons of people, I mean, God forbid, this horrible, there's a lot to talk about, this truck at a mosque in London, yeah? And you have, I was looking at the comments, and it's just nauseating. People talking about how, the Muslims got this, you better be ready for this. They do it to us, we're going to do it to them, right? Trolls. And if for a minute you imagine, and what ISIS, of course, is trying to do is saying, look, this is what they all want to do, right? And they're banking on our inability to recognize numbers, right? Because if everybody was wanting to do that, things would be a hell of a lot worse, right? These are outliers. And they prevent us from getting in dialogue. So as I mentioned, that tendency to go, oh, well, you're all trolls or you're all this, it's a defense mechanism because it prevents us from doing what Cassie J did in the film, which is entering into the complexity, which is a lot more difficult and uncomfortable. When you hear these stories about things that have happened to men in response to this, as a result of this system, it's uncomfortable. You don't want to, because the world's much easier if it's just an oppressor and an oppressed. I get that. That's how narratives are written. That's how storylines work. But we're all supposed to learn at a relatively early age, that what's in stories and what's real aren't the same thing. That they're not going to be the same. The world's not that clear cut, right? That it's much more complex than that. And that the human capacity for evil, and again, for evil, I don't mean guy with horns, I just mean selfishness, right? Is equal in every individual, every gender, every race. Yeah, it's not limited to one. And this notion that you can create in this sort of Marxist transition from Marxism, capital labor, to, you know, oppressor and oppressed, that's all it is, master slave, Hegel, whatever you want to call it, is an oversimplification, a radical oversimplification of what is a very complex thing. And if you want to enter into real discourse and dialogue, as I suggested when I posted a link or a reference to the film on social media, you have to be willing to enter into that complexity the way Cassie J is. And you have to be open to having your position changed. Every position, it has to be conditional until new evidence comes to light, with few exceptions. I mean, I mentioned it in the global warming video. You know, for those on the life issue, and I don't want to open too many issues, right? There's some where people say, well, it's very black and white. It's either a living or it's not. At what point, right? It's either born or it's not. Not born or it's not, but you get the point. Right? That those things people think are pretty black and white, and they are. But then, as I mentioned, incest, threat to the mother's life, there's complicating issues there too. There always are. And I know we have a human desire for things to be simple. We want it to be simple because it's easier, and especially in an age when we're overwhelmed with information and work, all this stuff that was supposed to make our lives easier and give us more leisure time. What are people doing? They're working in their leisure time because they can work from home or they can work from wherever they are. Used to be able to get on an airplane and relax for a few hours and be cut off from everything. Now, Wi-Fi on the thing. If you don't work, the other guy's going to work, right? So now we're overwhelmed, and we have a natural desire for things to be simple. So a tweet, a headline, a soundbite, so that we can pigeonhole a whole group of people, whether it's the men's rights activists or whatever. We can pigeonhole them and say, oh, that's all they are. That's a simplification, and it's desirable, and we want it, and I get that. But it's not the way we're going to get out of this thing. It's not. What we need are people who are willing to enter into the difficulty and the complexity and talk about it, and then take that out and talk to other people about it. The other people who aren't willing. We have to be led into that. We have to be pulled into it, into that understanding. Not constantly reassured that our limited pinhole view of the world, with us at the center and everyone out to get us or trying to do us, we have to be pulled out of that, shaken awake, if you will, to the reality and the complexity of it. That's the challenge. And that's what I'm hoping to do somewhat in these videos. So, yeah, I hope, again, I highly recommend the film, The Red Pill. I know Mike Cernovich was a producer. There's people who are polluting the source and think, well, I'm not going to do it because this guy is, you know, crazy right-wing. He's on InfoWars and he produced. Look, just be open. Logical argument number one, don't let it pollute the source, right? You can't just decide because it came from this one place, it's no good. You have to look at it and watch it. She uses statistics, examples. She backs up the things that she came to. And it's very honest. She's a very honest person who went through an experience and shares that experience of being changed, of having her position changed. And you know what? We all need to be open to that. We all do. So, because, as I say at the end of every one of these things, it's much more important to do right than it is to be right. Thanks for watching. Cheers.